Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Poop, the podcast where we talk about movies, music, and media. I know I say this every single time that we have a very special guest, and then it just always turns out to be Brian or Alicia. But this time, we really do have a special guest on the show, and we picked a very special movie to talk about. Due to the fact that this person is a professional and works in a professional setting, much like Brian Gunn, but he doesn't care as much. We're going to hide her identity, and we're going to call her Persephone. So Persephone, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good. Welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here. I'm a little nervous too, not gonna lie. I haven't done much like this before.
Doing a podcast is an amazing feat, and this is your first, so we're popping your podcast cherry.
Yeah.
But hopefully it won't be your last. So, tell people what your job title is.
I'm an autopsy technician, so that means in the state of Arizona, the state I work in, it's a medical examiner-based system, so when someone passes away, they potentially could get autopsied by a medical examiner. In the state of Arizona, it has to be signed by a medical examiner. And I'm one of the people who helps the doctor remove the organs and stuff like that.
Oh my God. Now, we met at Comic-Con through Alicia.
Yes.
I had met you before, but I never really got to hang out with you. And I certainly didn't know what your job was. So when I found out your job, all of my little penises stood straight up in the air. I was so excited. And I said, we have to have you on the podcast.
You know, I usually get a reaction of people wanting to hear more stories, so it's kind of flattering to get offered to be on a podcast. That's a lot different than just hearing the stories.
I'm sure that you get offered a lot of free beers to, go and just hang out and talk.
I wish. No, I end up talking to people over beers, and they're just like, tell me more. Oh, my God, don't tell me that. Oh, God, we're eating right now. Don't talk about that.
Well, I can tell you that there is nothing that I'm going to hear today that I will not want to hear more about. And I've got a series of questions for you that are extremely inappropriate. Which, honestly,
questions are pretty open. I just can't give details of stuff, like personal identifying details, but I'm pretty sure everything else is up for grabs because this is kind of public information. A lot of it you can request reports and stuff like that because we're county, state-based, so...
Well, I want first and last names, I want MR numbers, I want social security numbers.
Then this is going to be a very boring podcast because there's going to be no comment.
All right. Fair enough. Now, I had to ask myself, what movie would be the perfect movie to do with this amazing guest that we got? And I thought, boom, The Autopsy of Jane Doe.
Subject is in her mid to late 20s. Hair brown.
Flash flood warning now.
Eyes gray.
What happened to you?
First, they bound her. Then they ripped out her tongue, poisoned her, paralyzed her, forced her to swallow the cloth. What is that?
I had not seen this movie before. I just thought, you said autopsy, and then autopsy popped into my brain, and it was on Netflix, which makes it easy to view. So that worked out really well. So I watched this movie last night. When did you watch it?
Yesterday afternoon, this time yesterday. So
it's fresh in both of our heads.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited to talk about this movie. Luckily, we picked a crazy one. And this movie stars Brian Cox and Emile Hirsch and a dead body. It's pretty much the whole cast. I was excited because I knew that this was kind of a low-budget movie, but then I saw Brian Cox and Emile Hirsch, who you said you weren't really so familiar with their work.
Sorry.
But Brian Cox has been in everything. He was in X-Men 2.
I don't know actors' names. If you tell me who they played, I'd probably recognize it more than actor names, unless I really, really like them.
Well, okay, let me look up some Brian Cox movies. But I know that he was in X-Men 2, and he's a funny guy in something else. Emile Hirsch was in The Girl Next Door. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think so, but which one was the dad in the movie?
The dad is Brian Cox. He's an old guy. He's been in like everything.
He seemed. Oh, I know who he is in X-Men. Then he was the doctor. He was the evil doctor dude.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Stryker was his name. But...
Yeah, thank you. Because I'll recognize like characters that they've played unless I really, really like them. Like I know all the Avengers actors because I really liked those movies.
Right.
But if I don't like, if you're not the main star of a movie and I don't see you a lot and I don't like you too much, I might not know your name. I'm just not good with actors' names.
Understood. Thanks for being on a movie show and you don't know any actors' names. Let's see. So Emile Hirsch, though, the younger guy, the guy that played the son, he was in The Girl Next Door, and he was in Speed Racer. Did you see Speed Racer?
I did not see Speed Racer. I'm sorry.
You know what? Oh, what he was funny in that I couldn't remember. Brian Cox was he's the captain in Super Troopers.
Oh, okay. I know where you're going now. Okay.
Yeah. And then he was also the king in Troy.
Yes, I vaguely remember that one. It's been a while since I've seen Troy, but yeah.
So that was a big one that he was in. Let's see. Super Troopers 2. He was in Pixels. That was a piece of crap.
Yeah, that one, the previews didn't look great, so I kind of avoided that one.
You didn't miss much. He was in Red 2. He was the Russian guy who was all like horny for Helen Mirren.
Oh, okay. That's awkward.
He was in the Bourne movies. I don't really remember him from those.
No, I can't remember him from those either.
He's one of those actors. He's in everything, and he pops up in a bunch of stuff, but he doesn't necessarily play like a real memorable character.
Yeah, he's not just like front and center in your mind kind of character. Yeah.
Oh, he was in Braveheart.
Yeah, no, can't remember him in that either.
I don't remember him in that either. I've seen Braveheart like 1,000,000 times. All right, let's move on to Emile Hirsch and see what he was in. So he's been in 221 movies.
Wow.
That's a lot of movies.
That is, and it makes it harder because I've seen movies. I'm not like just cut off from the world hermit, but I haven't seen all the movies ever.
You haven't seen all the movies ever? What the hell?
I haven't seen all the movies. I know, I'm such a disappointment.
So in comparison, Emile Hirsch has only been in 54 movies.
Wow, that's a lot less.
Yeah, welcome to doing math. Talking poop about math.
Very, very specific math, too. Like, super obvious that that's way less.
So he was in Milk. Did you see the movie about Harvey Milk?
No, I remember seeing previews and I was like, oh, that could be an interesting one. And, like, if someone else I knew was watching it or wanted to watch it, I might watch it. But it's not something I just flip through and be like, hey, let's watch this.
It doesn't seem like it'd be the feel-good movie of the year. Oh, Into the Wild. That's where you would know him from.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that now.
You're from Flagstaff, so I know you've seen Into the Wild.
Yeah.
You sat there eating granola and just dreaming about what a great life that would be.
Maybe like 2 bites of granola and then I pushed it aside for the chips because I'm not a big granola fan.
How about Alpha Dog with Justin Timberlake? Did you ever see that?
I don't think so.
God damn it. Did you see the trailer for it?
I don't think so, honestly. I remember some movies Justin Timberlake has been in, and that's not one of the ones I remember watching.
What about Lords of Dogtown, the skating movie?
Nope.
He was on ER and NYPD Blue.
Oh, man. No, I don't really watch those.
God damn it. All right, so you don't know anybody. You just watched this movie and you were like, hey, look at these 2 brand new actors that are in this movie.
I was like, hey, look at these obscure people in this tiny budget movie. This is going to be interesting. Let's watch this.
But my original statement was going to be that I was impressed that they got 2 good actors, albeit character actors, to be in this horror movie, because normally horror movies are just like nobody.
Well, especially if you're low budget, like Paranormal Activity started out super low budget. At least that's what I thought anyway. And they didn't have famous actors, and then it blew up and got huge. And I mean, to start off with a low budget movie but have big actors in it, that's impressive.
I agree. Yeah. And this was the perfect like horror setup for me, I thought, because it starts off in just like a creepy location, and then you've got a couple of dudes in a creepy like isolated setting, which is like the perfect place for a horror movie. And I liked how they set up that the like their front part of their business was the old part, and then like the where they were actually working was like more of a modern setup in the back, so they could kind of have like the creepy setup and then the laboratory.
I mean, if we're talking about like realistic autopsy facilities, it all was super actually antiquated. The building itself looked like it was an old home, and they turned it into a funeral home / morgue is what they had on the front.
Right.
Which is not how it works. I even looked up, so I was really curious about what state they were in. So they said they were in Virginia, so I was curious about Virginia, and I looked it up. Virginia is also a medical examiner state, and they kept calling themselves coroners. Right. So that was inaccurate. And that kind of changed a little bit of the tone of what they were doing a little bit. So a medical examiner is a doctor who has been through medical school. He's licensed, or he or she is licensed. They've gone through testing and everything else to become a doctor in forensic pathology is what their job title is, their job description. A coroner's office is actually an elected position. It's something that's very big still in the South, and a little bit on the East Coast, and it's also something in California that they do. So it could be pretty much anyone who can get elected into the position of being a coroner.
So they don't have to be like a doctor first?
No. So that's why those systems are a little bit different. There are some really, really good coroner systems. The one in Vegas is very well known because the coroner there has set up a system to be run almost exactly like a medical examiner's office. But a coroner system versus a medical examiner system is very different. That's not to say that medical examiner systems don't have their faults, because they do, but a coroner system is a lot different because it's an elected position. They tend to work closer with police departments, which is fine unless you get police departments who are kind of like, hey, you know what, this we already know what happened here.
Right.
And kind of feeding into the answers. So coroner systems can be very, very biased, more so than medical examiners. Not always true. There's always faults in every system, but a coroner system is not necessarily, in my opinion, it's not the best system because it's an elected position. It's an official who doesn't have to have a doctor's degree, so they might not necessarily know everything that's going on.
So they just dig around in dead bodies and they're just not even qualified?
They can, or they can hire on other people to go through the bodies for them and stuff like that. But yeah, their decision in the end is not necessarily always medically based.
Okay, so was it a coroner or was it a medical examiner who did JFK?
I believe that would have had to be a medical examiner. I'm like very sure about that because that was done with the FBI, and FBI is going to go medical examiner. They're going to go.
Yeah, but they for sure was like, what's going on this report is what we say is going on this report.
That's true. And in certain cases, there are things that get hidden more, like high-profile cases, things get hidden away from the public more. I don't necessarily know about JFK because I haven't actually looked into that one where, like, when they took his body to be autopsied and everything, I've never really thought about that, actually, honestly. So I'm not entirely sure, but I would bet that it was more likely to be a medical examiner than a coroner, and it was just the report that was kind of hushed up. They didn't.
Right. That was some shady shit.
Yeah, it gets really sketchy. Like I said, both sides can get really sketchy. Coroner, I feel, is a little bit more sketchy, but that's my personal opinion.
So they set it up. So these guys were coroners, you said?
Yeah. So in this system, they were coroners, and that's why I can't comment a whole bunch on a lot of what they were doing, because to me it seems really, really weird. But I work in a medical examiner system. Right. The fact that it was a father-son team is super weird.
That was super weird, right? Yeah, because You could just say whatever and be like, right, son, right? This is how she died.
And, like, who follows in their father's footsteps to cut open dead people? Like,
yeah, they kind of showed that, like, he wasn't into it. But I'm like, it takes a really, like, special kind of person to even be in the room with the dead person, much less start touching and fondling and removing things.
Well, and they gave him a title partway through the autopsy, and they called him a medical technician, which I haven't heard, because that's such a generic term that could be used, like, in a hospital.
Right.
That could be used in a medical examiner's office, I guess. Like, medical technician is just so general that it's like, well, so how is he really qualified to be doing this? Right. But okay, sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, their whole setup in a funeral home / morgue is definitely not normal for a medical examiner system.
Well, I was going to ask you about their setup, because just like every time you see in a horror movie, when they go to the medical examiner, no matter if it's a big hospital or if it's like this one where it's a little morgue, the lights are always flashing on and off.
No, not in our building anyway. I've worked in 2 different offices in Arizona, and I've seen a couple of the other offices. And no, lights aren't usually flickering. I mean, in the office I currently work in, every once in a while the monsoon storms get really bad. Yeah. But in the 4 years I've worked there, the power has never gone out. Even though my coworkers have told me they've had issues where the power has gone out, I've been there 4 years and it hasn't gone out since. So
if it goes out, does the red lights kick on and it's super creepy in there?
No, it pretty much goes like pitch black, unfortunately for us.
Oh my God.
We have a generator that backs up the cooler, so the cooler will always stay cold. But for the rest of the building, it just goes black. And luckily, in our autopsy suite, we have skylights. So as long as there's some light coming through the skylight, we can see what we're doing. But it can get really dangerous.
So you have a skylight? You're not in like a creepy underground basement?
No, we're not underground at all.
What the hell? So like if somebody walks on your roof, like is like putting up Christmas lights, they could look into your skylight and see dead people?
No. First of all, no one's putting up Christmas lights on the morgue. That's just odd. And then our skylights are built so you can't really see through them. Like it's an opaque glass and there's bars on top of the skylight so no one can just like break in through the skylight or like that. But no, in the 2 offices that I've worked for, they've both been first floor of 1-story building, the only floor of the 1-story building. Not in the basement. They're kind of, for the most part, they're away from like downtown. They're not like in the mix of things. Like there's a police buildings that are right in the middle of downtown and everything else like that, but we're off kind of to the side. Kind of don't want people just like walking up to our front door. So
that was another question I was going to ask. In every single movie, horror or not, somebody always can just walk right up to the coroner's office or right up to the morgue, find a white coat hanging on the outside, put one on, and just walk right into the bodies.
No, definitely not. Security measures are different depending on which office you're in, but in any office that I've been in, you can't just walk in and put on a lab coat. That's definitely not something that's okay, and definitely not something that I've seen happen ever or heard of.
Do you leave the charts at the foot of the patient's bed where you can look at a dead body and pick up their chart and then find out everything about them?
No. They get filed away in a whole filing system in a file room. The file goes with whoever needs to put information in it at the time. So, like, the investigator has a file in the morning and they're putting their information into it and everything. And that file gets passed on to the doctors who review the case and decide what kind of exam they're going to do, whether they're going to do a full autopsy and open the person up, whether they're going to do just an external examination where they just look over everything on the outside. They could review medical records and stuff like that to determine cause of death. Or if it's not even a case that's going to come to our office. So once the doctor goes through that, those case files then get distributed as they need to, like the ones that go for full autopsies or external exams will come to the technicians and we'll start doing our stuff with it. We'll take notes and put information in there, take fingerprints and put those in the file. And then those files get passed on to the next person. They're not ever just left at a patient's foot, really.
Okay, so I feel really lied to by movies right now. I'm feeling really...
Yeah, they're not accurate about autopsies, really at all. I mean, there's some that come really close, but not quite.
So this one, though, that we watched, it came really close, right?
I mean, again, it goes back to a coroner system versus medical examiner system. In the medical examiner system, we would not have done a lot of the things they did. Some of it's kind of similar and kind of accurate, but a lot of it was kind of just way out there. And some of it is definitely just Hollywood throwing it out there to make a storyline.
Right. Much apparently like it being in the basement.
Yeah, if it being in the basement, it being attached to a crematory, that doesn't happen as far as I know. Like I said, a coroner's office might have that. I don't really know. And I haven't been to any coroner's offices, so maybe that's true for coroner's office. But in the state of Virginia, that wouldn't be happening.
Right. I spent 11 years working in a hospital and Flagstaff Medical Center, so I know a little bit. And one thing I do know is that everything is separated. Nothing is, like, together. Like you said,
right.
Like the crematorium is not going to be right next to the morgue.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I can think of is in the South, like in older states, they might have combination places because that's how they started out, and they're the states themselves obviously have been around for longer than the farther states west and everything else, so I don't think they would have kept everything combined, but it is a possibility. Funding reasons and everything else, like funding for a medical examiner's office is through the state and through the counties and everything, and it's not necessarily, you're not working there, I'm not making top dollar, the doctors aren't making top dollar, they're making a decent salary, but they're not making the best salary a doctor could make, and everything is funded through taxes.
Right.
So, you can imagine how high tech we are with everything being funded through taxes and everything having to be approved before we get it, kind of thing.
But you don't have a creaky elevator with one of those metal gates that closes.
No, we're one story.
So I feel like you should have that even if it's just one story. Like you have to go through a creaky gate
just to make it dramatic,
just to get into like your office area.
That'd be entertaining. No, we don't have that. We have like gates that make some loud noises that you have to have a key to open, but it's not
Oh, is it one of those big giant keys that's like on a huge ring, like a prison key?
No.
God damn it.
That would be so easy for someone to pick the lock, so no.
You're supposed to be able to pick the lock so you could go in there.
No. I mean, so my car broke down a couple of years ago and I had to get to work, so I Ubered to work. And everyone would always ask me, like, oh, where do you work? And I told them, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't even know where that was. That's what that building, oh my God, that's so crazy. So we're usually so off the grid for the most part. I mean, you can Google map us and still find us, but
right.
For the most part, we're off the grid that no one even knows what the building is. They don't even really care, so.
Right. That was like where I used to work at a military base, Camp Navajo, outside of Flagstaff, and like nobody realizes that they just like see like a water tower out to the left, and they just are like, oh yeah, they have no idea that there's like all kinds of crazy shit out there.
Right, hey, there's something over there. That's cool. All right, keep going.
Yeah. Nobody ever looks or notices, but that's the thing. That's how the government does it. They hide right out in front of everybody.
Well, right, and there are some things like you don't want to know where all the dead people are housed. I've had some people. We were doing a remodel of one of our rooms for a new x-ray machine, and one of the construction workers who was helping clear out the room so they could make it bigger for the new x-ray machine had a total meltdown walking into the room and walking through our building because it's where the dead people were, and he just had so much issues with his past and having to walk in where dead people were. He had a complete meltdown, couldn't do it, couldn't handle being there, didn't end up on that job for very long. Like, there are a lot of people who just don't want to know and don't need to be around it, and that's totally fine. I understand it. It makes sense. It's not easily walked into. You can't just walk in there and be like, oh yeah, I'm okay with this. This is fine.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it, but yeah, it scares the shit out of me, for sure. So I would probably be that construction worker that was like, I can't be here. Ah!
So our cooler doors, on the inside, they have they don't have like a classic doorknob because it just doesn't function with the way the cooler works. So you have to kind of hit the knob to open the door. And every once in a while, we'll be coming out of the cooler to do something out in one of the other rooms, and like a funeral home is there to pick up a body. and you hit that button and you walk out and they're like, oh my god, I thought it was someone walking out of it. Like, I thought there was a body coming out. I thought there was a zombie. Like, God, that scared me. So even some people in our profession still get a little bit freaked out just by it's just kind of the nature of the profession. Like, all of a sudden some loud noise is happening and a door is opening somewhere and it freaks you out a little bit.
Yeah. So when you hear the loud noise, do you investigate or do you just ignore it and go on with your day?
Every once in a while, like, someone's doing something in the cooler, like moving trays around or whatever, and you'll hear some slamming and banging, and at this point I'm just like, okay, so someone's in there. If they really need help, they'll like hit the emergency button on the lift and honk the horn or something. I think I can just let it go for now. We're good.
Okay. Do the dead bodies have little bells on their toes?
No, but I thought that was really, really interesting. I've never heard that for bodies in a morgue. The story of that I know of comes from Typhoid Mary, and this is actually legit. Like, Typhoid Mary ended up having typhoid, and before she passed away, she went into a severe coma state, which can happen with typhoid. And so it was a thing that they did after she died, where they had buried her, but they didn't know that she was actually still alive. She was just in a coma, because at the time you couldn't really tell the difference from a coma versus being dead. So she was buried, and I might be getting this part wrong, but she either didn't have a bell, and this was before they had the bells in the cemetery, which is where I've heard the stories. They had the bells in the cemetery, and they tied a string to the decedent's finger. And if they would wake up from a coma, they could ring the bell and someone was sitting in the grave and they'd come dig them out and be like, oh my God, you're not dead. But for Typhoid Mary, if I'm remembering the story right, which I could be wrong, but she didn't have a bell, or her bell got knocked over or something, and she was like clawing at her and trying to get out and freaking out. And she ends up dying because she's buried 6 feet underground. She doesn't have any more air. She had to freak out and used up all the air. So she did end up dying. But they looked into everything with her grave after. I think it was that her bell got knocked over, and someone saw it the next day and was like, what's going on here? And they found out that she was still alive when they buried her. But because her bell wasn't working, she had ended up dying later. And that's why she was Bloody Mary, was because she like ripped the nails out of her fingers. She was trying to claw through the coffin and everything.
Absolutely horrifying.
Some of the story might be wrong the way I'm telling it, but I mean, you can look up the story of Typhoid Mary, but that was one of the reasons they had bells in cemeteries, was for the people who might not be dead yet.
Oh my God.
So it's interesting that they put that in a morgue setting. I've never heard that story for a morgue setting.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true. Maybe it was true for older facilities, for facilities in the South. I'm not entirely sure. I've never heard that story, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So, and I've seen another movie where they had like a pull chain where they could like pull and it would like do an alarm. So do you guys have anything like that where like the bodies can communicate with you?
No. Because our office, so we are the last call. So first responders are considered, in a lot of places, first responders are considered firefighters, police officers, paramedics. We get called at the end of that when everyone's already been declared dead. So if the paramedics are on scene, if police are on scene, they will declare them dead. Paramedics will call a doctor and say, hey, we don't have a pulse for this long. Is it okay if we declare them dead? And the doctor on the other end of the phone says, yes, they're declared dead. You know, police officers walk onto a scene and someone has obviously been dead for like a week or something. They get declared dead. It's not often... It's not been a thing at our office where a person comes in and they've been alive and no one could tell, like they've officially been declared dead.
Right.
There have been some issues with declaring someone dead in other places. I've heard stories, and I've heard mainly, I want to say I've read 2 stories recently from Africa where someone was hooked up to an EKG machine and their vitals were getting read. And either the machine malfunctioned or their vitals were just so low the machine couldn't read it, that they were declared dead, but they were found later to actually have been alive.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's not a thing that happens often. It's not a thing that I've heard about in the United States too much. It's not really a thing that I know of, at least not in the United States or the offices that I've worked in.
I know that, like, when I worked at the hospital, we used to take the patients off the helicopter, and the helicopter doesn't have a doctor. So no matter how fucked up and dead the people were, like, they had to keep doing, like, chest compressions because the doctor couldn't legally say they were dead until they were at the hospital.
Yeah, and I think I'm not entirely sure the state statutes on it and everything, but from what I know, from working in the offices I've worked in, is a lot of times the EMTs can call a doctor and tell the doctor everything they've been doing, the vital signs that they're reading from the computers and everything else, and feeling their pulse, and say, this is what's been going on, they haven't had signs of life for this long, what do you want us to do? And the doctor can do it telephonically. I think that's more of a bigger thing now, especially as technology is advancing and everything else.
Yeah, this was like 15 years ago, so. Okay, so you don't work in a creepy downstairs basement, and
Nope.
you don't have to go through a creepy gate to get to work. You said you open a big cooler, though. I thought you had little square doors in the wall that you, like, pull their bed out, and then the body's on there.
So that one is more, depends on the office. Our office services a huge population, and we also contract with other areas. So we have to have a giant cooler to house everyone that we take care of. In other counties, smaller counties, they might have just like an 8-door cooler, and it's more like that, where it's doors on a cooler and you roll the body into one drawer and everything else. But
right, yeah.
In our building, it's different because we service a lot more.
So you just walk into a cooler and there's just dead bodies everywhere?
They're in body bags. They're not just like exposed to the world.
No. They're under white sheets and you can see their feet with the toe tags.
No, so toe tags are a thing that I've seen from hospitals, but the medical examiner's offices I've worked for don't do toe tags. They
No, tell me this is not so.
It's so.
You're
Hospitals
ruining
don't
everything.
Toe tags, but it's not a thing for the medical examiners.
God damn it. I knew you were going to ruin movies for me forever. That sucks.
Maybe this is why the movie didn't scare me at all, or maybe I'm just too logical for most scary movies, but...
Oh my god. Okay, so they're in body bags, so they're just like, are they on beds at least?
They're on what we call trays that can slide into our cooler. So our cooler is a stacked system of racks that we can just slide people into on their trays.
Jesus, how many people are there in there?
It depends on when.
On a busy night, you walk into the cooler and what are you looking at?
It honestly depends when you're going in there. Like, at the beginning of last week, our office was super busy, so we had a whole bunch more bodies in our cooler. Towards the end of the week, a lot of funeral homes came to pick people up, and we didn't have new incoming cases, so our cooler was pretty empty. It kind of just depends on the time of year and what's going on.
Okay, what's creepier, an empty cooler or a full cooler?
I don't know. Honestly, like, it's never been creepy to me, so I'm not entirely sure. That one's going to have to go out to the masses, and the masses have to decide on that one.
All right, then walk us through the first time that you were around a dead body or, like, went into these coolers. Were you creeped out then?
So my degree was in chemistry, and at the university I was going to, you had to finish an internship to complete your chemistry forensic degree, which is what I have. And supposedly the only 2 internships in town were at the medical examiner's office and DPS. Well, it turns out they didn't have a system with DPS, so that one wasn't going to work, which was fine because I was like, I'll go to the medical examiner's office. That could be interesting. That's kind of more of what I'm interested in at the time. I was thinking of becoming like a crime scene investigator or forensic anthropologist, so going to the medical examiner's office was definitely more what I wanted to do. So I went there, and you have to do observations where you just like show that you can handle watching an autopsy. And I want to say my first one was a multiple fatality car accident. And I think that one, I'm trying to remember back, but I think that one also had a little kid in it too, which was intense. Yeah, it wasn't a baby, but it was a young kid, which was intense. And I remember that morning, my mom came to me and she was like, okay, it's okay if you're freaking out. Maybe you don't want to eat too much for breakfast. Stay on the lighter side. Like, don't worry about it. And I kind of was nervous because I was like, I don't know what to expect. I've never seen a dead body before. I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle this or not. Actually, that's not true. I took an anatomy and physiology class in high school, and we went to a university science lab where they looked at cadavers, the cadaver lab. And I got to see those, but it wasn't the same thing necessarily because those cadavers had been preserved in formalin. They had donated their bodies to science and everything else. So that was a little bit different. I'd never seen like someone die and their body after they had died in a car accident or anything like that. Never been around that. So I was really, really nervous my first time there. And I walked in, and it actually, for me personally, it wasn't that bad. Like, there were smells, and everyone's always commenting on smells. Yes, there were smells. They were weird. They were kind of gross. But honestly, after a while, my brain just kind of filtered it out, and I just got to watch the autopsies and learn what was going on and everything else. So I don't know if that makes me weird, because it's just kind of been a normal thing for me, but it's just how my brain has processed everything.
Right.
Like, this is a necessary job to the community.
Right.
So it was something normal to me, sort of.
I've seen some gnarly fucked up stuff, like especially coming in off the helicopter. And the thing that I always noticed is that it looks faker than it looks in movies. Like, it doesn't look real. And I don't know if that's your mind protecting you from it. But, like, you look at something really gross and you're like, that isn't as, like, it's not as repelling as I would have thought it would be.
I think it all depends on you personally, and it also depends on, like, what movies you've seen and everything. Like, for me, the biggest thing in movies and TV shows when they're showing an autopsy is they never show necessarily the layers to a person's body. Like, when you're opening someone up, there's a layer of fat, which, depending on who you are, if you work out or if you don't, it's bigger or not. Like, everyone has an insulating layer of fat. Everyone has layers of muscles between the layers of skin, but usually in the TV shows and movies, all you see is them just, like, pulling back skin, which always, I think they make it look grotesque and worse than sometimes it is, because all they show is just this red mess, and it doesn't actually look the same. And for me, my thing isn't, like, seeing blood doesn't freak me out, seeing certain things doesn't really freak me out. What freaks me out is hearing the bones. Like, if someone has a broken bone and you move the bone and everything, you hear that crack noise. Like, that bothers me, because I can just feel how that broken bone feels for a person, and that bothers me. Like, bones aren't supposed to be broken, so that's an issue for me. But it all depends on who you are. Like, I know people who have issues with the eyeball. I know people who have issues with toenails, if someone has really long toenails or fingernails. It just depends on what bothers each person. And there's no one that I've met in this field that doesn't have an issue with something. Yeah. Even the doctors, like, there's something that bothers them, so they'd rather avoid it if they can, but they push through it if they have to, you know? It's
like with my kids. I can do poop and vomit, but boogers, fucking forget it. I do not deal with boogers.
Exactly like that. Like, there are some people who can deal with really, really decomposed people. They can deal with the blood. They can deal with whatever. But it comes to, like, someone who just pooped in the body bag or whatever, and they're just like, nope, I can't do that. That's gross. Get it away from me.
Right. Yeah. I remember one of the weird things is, like, I saw, like, severed limbs and, like, people getting opened up and stuff. But, like, one time this dude had slit his own throat, and he was sitting up in the bed, and they were sewing his neck closed, and a little piece of fat came out and, like, got caught in the stitches, and that I was like, I can't look at that.
That's really intense too. Someone slitting their throat. That's a lot to see, and he survived too, which is pretty impressive.
Oh yeah, he was sitting up while they were stitching it closed, awake.
I mean, this might sound really bad, but he must not have been as determined, because the people I've seen who want to slit their throat get, like, super determined, and if it doesn't work when they slit their throat, they go somewhere else to try to make sure they die.
Yeah, no, this was superficial. It was just the skin, but it had opened up the skin, and you could see, like, the fat layer underneath. So yeah, that grossed me out. And then as far as smells go, bum feet is the worst thing in the world. And we used to, when we first started there, bum feet, they would take their shoes off because they had to, and then they would like fucking put like delousing powder in a bag and then wrap their feet in the bag and then tape it closed. So all the bums had these like bags on their feet, and then people started being like, why do all these like bum guys have bags on their feet? And they're like, that's not like nice. And we're like, all right, motherfuckers, you can just smell that shit in the whole emergency room then. And so we stopped doing that. We just had to let them, like, we'd take it off, and sometimes you take the shoe off and the bottom of the foot would come with it. And
See, what's worse for me is when they're alive and having these issues. Like, working in a hospital is never going to be my thing.
Right.
Because they can still feel a lot of what's going on to them. Whereas after they've died, at least in my belief, I believe that they've, like, moved on. They don't feel anything.
Right. Whatever.
So, like, even though their broken bones bother me, it's like everything else that happens to them is not as much of an issue because they're not here to feel it anymore. Right. That doesn't mean we go around like throwing them around and slamming them on tables and everything. We're still really respectful.
Right.
But to do what we have to do to get the answers that the family wants and needs and everything else, it's not as bad to me because they're dead.
Right.
They don't feel.
So does it pretty much, it's got to be like going through like an old like automotive center, and like it's just parts. They're just parts.
I mean, kind of. You kind of, there is like a flow to every case, and you get going and you just move along and get everything done. But honestly, with a lot of people, there's like anatomy is super similar through everybody, but it's never exactly the same. And there's always like fascinating stuff that comes up on a regular basis. Like I was just working the other day on a woman who seemed to just have like a regular heart attack. There wasn't too much going on with her. And then I got to her skull and everything and had to saw through her skull. And it was super thick. It was like 2 centimeters thick, which is doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot in our business. Like your head is, that was basically like a helmet. She was pretty much just wearing a helmet as her skull. And that was impressive, like how thick that skull was. And so that was like fascinating to me that day. Like that was a thing that was super, super interesting and made my job interesting, you know?
So please tell me you guys like make gross jokes. Because I know the people at the hospital did. Like, were you like, this chick's a real bonehead?
Not quite like that. But we talked about it and we were like, you know, I wonder like if she headbutted someone, she wouldn't fracture her skull or hurt herself. It would just like damage whoever else she was headbutting. And, you know, if she ever had to be in a situation where she might have gotten shot or something, I'm not sure the bullet would have gone through the skull because the skull was so thick. Like,
oh my gosh.
You have theories like that. And I mean, it's a job. I feel like it's a job like any hospital job, any law enforcement job. You know, it's super stressful at times. It can be super sad and depressing. So you've got to find ways to alleviate that tension and get some humor going so it doesn't always constantly affect you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are joking back there. It's not usually directed directly at the people we're working on. It's usually just in general, or it's joking with each other about stuff that each other has been doing back there or whatever. We try to stay away from being disrespectful. But jokes do get made. It's a job that you've got to have some levity to, otherwise you're all just going to be miserable.
Yeah. So you have seen more wieners than Jenna Jameson at a cockfight. I need to know, like, how does that affect your life? Seeing all those weird wieners. And you said everybody has anatomy is different. What you really wanted to say was people got some weird wieners.
So I've seen some weird stuff. I will totally admit to that. Honestly, for the most part, like I said with the smell thing, it kind of just filters out unless there's something really weird going on there. We've had a couple guys who have had those dermal implants in different shapes.
Oh, yeah.
We've had people with piercings, and those have always been fun. I was working with a doctor one time, and she was going through her external examination, just making note of any bruises or anything else they had on them, their personal property, whatever. And she was looking, she's like, so this is your job right here. And it was a piercing right underneath his balls and everything else. So
you got to go in there and get it.
Yep, we had to remove it because that's technically personal effects, and that go back to the family if they want it and everything else. So that was kind of gross. Yeah.
Oh man. So you guys, if you're listening to this and you have like a piercing in your nuts, just think about that. Your grandma's going to get that back after you die. So just double think where you're getting pierced. Do you tell them if they're like, oh, that's a weird thing, where did that come from? And you're like, oh, I pulled it out of his taint.
We don't give specifics. No, we kind of just send it back as this was a piercing that they had. We don't even get specific on like what we tell what color, but we never say like anything super specific, so it's not putting value on it, more or less, and it's not saying where it was found, and it's not anything that could come back later and possibly get us in trouble. You know, we try to stay very vague but still descriptive enough that, you know, like, oh no, this is what they were talking about in this description.
Yeah, it was like that at the hospital too. Like when we locked up jewelry, it was always yellow metal. We couldn't say gold, you know.
Yeah,
we're like, we're not jewelers, we don't know, you know.
Exactly. You start adding value to something that might not have value, and then all of a sudden, you know, someone's upset that their gold ring was missing when it was never actually made of gold.
Yeah. Oh, man. That's some crazy stuff. So, back to the wieners. Like, you probably seen, like, a lot of weird STD stuff, too, huh?
Honestly, not too much. Like, a lot of... I don't really know how to explain it. Like, a lot of the STD things don't present as many outward symptoms necessarily. I've heard stories of coworkers seeing like crabs on people, which is really gross.
Ew.
I've seen some weird deformities, whatever, with penises and stuff. And like I said, those dermals. I'm gonna say, whoever's out there listening, like, dermals are weird. Don't get one on your penis. It's just awkward for everyone involved.
You bring up another interesting question. Have you ever seen, like, a vagina and a penis?
No, actually, I have not. There are certain things that I'm, like, curious to see, just as a curious person in general, wanting to see whatever, you know. I have not seen a vagina and a penis. I haven't seen any weird... There have been people who have started a transition process, but I haven't gotten to the point where they've actually had the surgery yet or anything like that. They've just started like changing their clothes and maybe changing some of their hormones, so other body parts change, but not necessarily a sex change yet.
Oh my goodness. You gave me such a straight answer to that. It almost makes me uncomfortable. Okay, elephantitis of the penis?
No, mostly I've seen the elephantitis of the legs, which is still really, really gross. Like, it's just seeing it, it's like, I'm sorry you had to live with that. That is just... Ugh, that's a lot to deal with. That's grossing me out right now, and I'm sorry that you actually live with that. That's a serious issue there. But I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it in the penis. No.
Damn it! All right, I just wanted to check. Okay, so my last question, not my last question, but like my last question for this set of questioning. So, like in Last Dance with Mary Jane, Tom Petty. You probably have never seen a Tom Petty music video. Do you remember what music videos are?
Okay, so I have seen that music video.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Music-wise, I can go back to like 70s, 80s, even though I wasn't born in those eras, because I grew up with people who appreciated that kind of music, so I can appreciate that kind of music.
Excellent. So you've seen that music video. So in that music video, he steals a dead body, and because he finds her beautiful. Have you ever seen a dead body that you're like, what a waste of a perfectly good dude that I could have married? And B, would you ever try to steal him and take him home?
Okay, to answer B right away, no. I'm not going to steal him and take him home. I have seen guys who come through and they're really attractive. Like, I remember I was working in my first office and there was a guy who actually had gotten struck by lightning.
Whoa.
He was the only person in this entire just like empty plateau of people. There was a whole bunch of people around him, but there was no like tall trees or anything else around him, and he just happened to get struck and he died. And I remember seeing him and like, oh man, he was so pretty though. That's really, really sad. Like, as weird as that sounds, and I'm sorry for being weird, but like, good looking people come across the table and you're kind of like, oh man, that just really, really sucks.
Well, and that goes into the movie that we watched. I'll bring it back to the movie now. So they bring this body bag into the morgue and they open her up and it's this beautiful porcelain woman.
Yeah.
And they found her. It was kind of weird. They showed like a whole crime scene where everybody was dead and murdered.
Really, really weird too, by the way, because someone was walking around in a bunny suit, and that's definitely not normal. At least not in the places that I've worked. Wearing a full-on like hazmat suit.
Right.
a typical thing.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, they're going through the crime scene, then they go down to the basement, and they find in the basement this girl that has been buried under the basement and is half exposed.
Yeah.
And her body is, like, perfectly preserved in the basement. They pull her out, and she is perfectly preserved, and that's where our movie takes us, is that now she winds up at the medical examiner's office, and they're like, they need to know what this girl was doing at this crime scene. And they don't really explain the crime scene very well. Other than they say that it looked like somebody was trying to break out rather than somebody breaking in.
Yeah, and they said something about like 4 people being dead, and they showed blood everywhere. And I got kind of confused because like there was a gun at one point too, but for the amount of blood that was everywhere and the very little explanation, it seemed weird that there was so much blood if there was only a few gunshot wounds. Like, gunshot wounds bleed, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But it almost looked like someone had gotten shot and was, like, walking around and stumbling and smearing bloody handprints everywhere and everything. But they didn't ever really explain that. So, yeah, that was really interesting. Like, that was weird. You don't really know what happened to them. But I think that adds to, like, the mystery of the story, so.
Yeah, and I thought that it was going to come into play later and we'd get more information on that, but it never does, and we never do find out.
Yeah, no, it really didn't. I was waiting for that, too. Like, the sheriff would call and say, hey, we found this about these people. It was also really weird, by the way, that they only brought in the one body at a time, and they didn't bring in all the other people who died.
I thought that, too. I was like, what the hell? Why would they just bring in the one person? The other person is just laying at the house? Like, what the hell?
Like, what's going on there? Are they in someone else's cooler somewhere? Like, you got to get those bodies refrigerated soon, otherwise things are going to get really gross.
Yeah, seriously, that was weird. And then they made they were like, yeah, she's the priority. We got to find out about her by the morning. But it's like, fucking triage that shit. Like,
right? Like, you got to get the other people at least in the building.
Yeah.
It was definitely weird to me that they were working overnight. That's not a thing in our medical examiner system. Our building doesn't work overnight. Our investigators do. Investigators are on call 24/7. So if there's like an officer at a scene and he said, hey, there's a body here, someone just passed away of like a heart attack or something, our investigators are there to take the phone call and decide whether it comes into the building or not. That is 24/7. But our office does not do autopsies 24/7. That would be exhausting. You'd have to have so many people there to change shifts and everything else that's not really realistic.
That's a horror movie trope that you're ruining too. Like, there's always the weird guy who works the night shift, and that's when the weird body comes in, and that guy's like, oh yeah, he's like rocking out to music always.
I mean, if someone wants a movie idea, they could totally base it off the investigators working in the office, because there are investigators in the building late at night, and so they could be just like walking around the building and a body starts walking around or something. That could totally, I'm not saying that could happen, but that could totally be a plausible storyline for a Hollywood movie. That would make more sense than any of these other ones.
Are you allowed to listen to super loud rock music while you're doing your autopsy?
It depends on how the doctors feel, because we work, my position works for the doctors, so if the doctors are ones that appreciate music, we can turn on music for them, we can turn on our own music, and if they tell us to turn it off, we turn it off. Some doctors need more focus, some doctors need less noise while they're dictating, because they make all their comments and they dictate everything into a recorder, which then gets sent out to make a typed up report and everything for them later. So
I think I'd be good at that job. I would be good at the job where you like listen to the recording and it's like, hello, I'm Dr. Graves and I am doing this today. We're going to start by cutting open the chest cavity. And then I just like sit there and type that shit in like a dark, scary office with one light above my head.
So just go looking for transcriptionist jobs and you could make a gold mine at that.
Shit, maybe I'll do that. Forget this truck driving business.
I mean, you could either work for a hospital, like a whole bunch of doctors in a hospital, or you could end up working for a pathologist and transcribing a whole bunch of pathology notes for them.
Oh, yeah, that'd be fun, too.
Yeah.
I gotta look into this new career. Okay, so they start their autopsy, and he set Brian Cox, the head examiner, he checks out. Oh, we forgot the boyfriend. They set it up that the son, Emil Hirsch's character, was supposed to go on a date with his girlfriend,
Yeah.
And so we meet the girlfriend, and they bring her in to the room and just like let her look at the bodies.
Yeah, that's never gonna happen like that.
You can't bring a date after like dinner. You'd be like, hey, you want to see where I work? And you can't like take them in there and show them bodies.
No, I mean, every once in a while, someone's family will stop by and like bring them lunch or drop stuff off for them, but they don't get to just like walk into the cooler or walk into the autopsy suite when there's a body on the table. No, it's not a thing. Some offices, it depends on where you work, some offices will allow viewings for people who are interested in the field. So if they're going to become a pathologist, if they're looking into doing an internship like I did when I first started out, you have to do an observation credit. So you have to watch an autopsy to make sure you can handle it. And then you get to be more involved with the internship stuff. So if you're interested in the field, sometimes you get to at least watch an autopsy. We have police officers all the time in there watching autopsies for their cases and whatever else, sometimes for training purposes. But just bringing your loved one into the cooler and pulling out a body for them is not okay.
What about when the families have to identify, or like the prostitute's best friend has to go in and they just unzip it?
Anymore.
They don't do that?
No, that's not how it's done anymore. Some offices used to do that way. It depends on where you work. The offices that I worked in don't do that anymore. They'll take a photo of the person's face. They'll clean up the person's face and take a photo of it and show the family just the face. Like, they'll restrict it a whole lot. And that's only if the person looks okay. Like, they don't want to traumatize families or anything else. So they're not showing them, like, people who have been in terrible car accidents with a whole bunch of damage to their face or anything. It's only if they look okay enough for a family member to not be severely traumatized, like, oh my god, why'd you show me they have a gunshot to their forehead and I can clearly see it and everything. That doesn't happen. We're very respectful of the families. We try to accommodate as much as we can, but no, we don't do in-person identifications anymore.
I seen it in the movies where like they pull the girl like straight out of the river and she's all blue and she still has like shit all over her, and they unzip it all the way to her pelvis so you can see her boobies and everything, and they're just like, is this your daughter? And the guy's like, no.
Yeah, no, not so much. I mean, there are families on scene sometimes because whoever passes away, like, in their parents' house or whatever. But usually our investigators, and they try to get help with law enforcement to keep the family away, because at this point, like, walking in on finding someone passed away, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a friend, whatever, it's hard to see. For a lot of people, you don't even realize how bad it is until you walk into it yourself. Like, for me, walking into a scene, because I've been to scenes before, and it's kind of just part of the job, doing whatever. But if it were me walking in on the loved one, that'd still be really, really hard for me. Given the job that I do and everything else, I feel like it sometimes even makes it a little bit harder because I know everything that could potentially happen down the line.
Right.
So we just try to keep the families away from everything as possible so they don't have to endure some of that and have that as their last memory, you know?
Right. Well, is there ever a chance, do you know like, before you unzip a bag, do you, like, know who's in there before you would go? Like, you wouldn't just unzip a bag tomorrow and, like, it's me in there, and you're like, I just podcasted with him! Oh, no!
No, because first of all, you live in a different county than I do, so I'm not going to end up seeing you unless you end up making a trip down to where I live.
I drive a truck. I could wind up there.
It could happen. I'm not going to lie. We usually have, we can go through, we have a computer system for all of our cases, and we can go through and see the names of people beforehand if we want to. We usually get a heads up, like, if it's possibly a family member or something else, we'll get a heads up beforehand. If it's a good known friend, we could get a heads up beforehand. That's not always true, but the bodies are always identified. Well, that's not entirely true. If it's someone who can be identified, they have their name on the bag beforehand and everything else. Like, they've gone through the process of identifying them, verifying it with fingerprints, verifying it with family, verifying it with, like, secured home and IDs that are on them and everything else. We do thoroughly try to identify someone. We do get unidentified cases, especially the office that I work in. We're very close to where a lot of people cross the border, and sometimes they die as they're crossing the border, and you got to identify those people, and those ones take longer, and Those ones, it might not necessarily be an identification right off the bat because they might have falsified documents. They might not be visually identifiable. We might have to wait for fingerprints if we can do fingerprints. But if it's someone who is a U.S. citizen, a lot of times, not all the times, but a lot of times they'll be identified before they come into our office by law enforcement, by family, and everything else, whoever's on scene. And we can look at the names beforehand. We can see their names on their body bag before we do anything with them, everything else. So it's harder to be working back there and all of a sudden see someone that you knew, unless it's more of an acquaintance. Usually you know before they come across your table.
Well, at least I know now that if I do wind up at your office, you won't laugh at my penis.
No, unless you have some weird stuff going on with your penis.
I mean, it's weird, but it's not like it doesn't. I don't have any weird piercings or anything, but it's fairly average to the point where I don't think you would like point it out to others.
Oh,
I like have like call people in from the other room and be like, "Look at his weird wiener."
My God, come see this. Yeah. No, it'll probably just like filter through like everything else. Like, oh, here's a regular guy coming through, whatever.
It really does. Like the whole nudity thing is a weird thing because like when I worked at the hospital, we did see naked all the time. One of the first things we used to do when we first started there too, like so much changed when I was working there. When I started there, it was like goddamn bedrock, and it was just like so ancient how they did everything. And every drunk that came in got cathed immediately. And
Oof.
We stopped doing that because, for one, it cost a lot of money to do all those catheters, but also it was not very like respective and nice. And that was part of it, that they're doing it that reason. You know, they're like, we're going to make it so that this is not a pleasurable experience for you. But every single time they bring in a drunk chick, we had to spread her legs and while the doc did the catheter. And so like that was embarrassing, but like at the same time, you're just like, yeah, it's like you see it every day. Mm-hmm. But I remember this one time I was watching this 15-year-old girl and she was a psych patient and she tried to leave the room and I was like, you legally can't leave the room. You're here under a psych hold. And so she stripped down totally naked and she was like, are you going to fucking tackle me now, motherfucker? And I was like, doctor. And like I called a female doctor over there.
No, over here.
2 nurses came over, they grabbed her, they gave her a shot, she went night-night, and then it was not a problem. But yeah, in that case I was like, excuse me.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm sure, like, so, like, that's the other thing. You always see naked boobies whenever they show dead, hot, naked girls in the morgue. I'm sure you guys don't, like, let them just stand there, chesticles up.
I mean, honestly, so a person comes in, the doctor starts their examination. We do have to remove their clothing because we've got to see everything that's happening. Like, if they have bruises somewhere, if they potentially have any other kind of wounds somewhere, what's going on, if they have a scar from something, like we've got to know what's going on. So it's kind of a necessity of the job for the person to be unclothed for the exam.
Right.
After the exam, they're put in a body bag and they're covered up. So unless they're being examined, they're not completely exposed, but for the duration of the exam, they do have to be unclothed and so the doctor can see everything that's happening and figure out cause of death.
And that never bothers you?
Not too much, honestly, because we're not being disrespectful. We're not doing this to be disrespectful for them, to them. We're trying to keep in mind that their family wants to know why this person died. Law enforcement needs to know why this person died. There's so many situations that our job is super, super necessary that it's just another process, you know?
Right.
Honestly, I've never been one to be disturbed by the naked human body. Maybe that also makes me weird, but it's just kind of like natural to me.
It just makes you European.
I'm not walking around naked, but it's like everyone at some point in their life has to be naked. It's not going to bother me. I'm not going to judge a whole bunch of people after they died for stuff they can't control.
I don't like looking at myself naked. If I can prevent it, I do. I try not to shower. Like when I shower, I never look down.
Oh, man.
Yeah, if it's like I need to like, I don't know, shampoo my feet or something, then I always wear like a bathing suit so that I don't accidentally see my penis.
We might need to talk about some of your your insecurities here. This could be a potentially damning situation.
Hey, I'm interviewing you. You're not turning this around on me.
And it stops right there. And it continues right here.
Hey everybody, I think that's a good place to stop the podcast for right now. I don't know about you guys, but I am really enjoying this episode. And I hate to toot my own horn, but toot toot, I think I'm killing it. I mean, I'm asking the questions that everybody wants to know, but is always afraid to ask. Or I'm proving that I'm a trash person and that there should be regulation when it comes to podcast material. I don't know, but either way, I'm hoping that you're going to join me for next week's episode when we continue our conversation with the wonderful Persephone, who was kind enough to sit down and take my horrible questioning. So I want to thank her for taking the time and answering every single one of my questions. There were some that I thought she would turn away. She answered everything that I asked. Next week, we've got some really special stuff coming up for you. We talk zombies. We talk about elephantitis of the penis. We answer the question that everybody wants to know: do dead people fart? All this and more on next week's episode of Talking Poop. So please tune in next week. Tell a friend. Tell your grandma. Talking Poop. If you're not talking poop, you don't know shit. Have a great week, everybody.